I remember the way the air shifted the night everything changed. Thick, heavy, and full of the kind of silence that follows a confession no one was ready to hear. It was late. The house was asleep, and I sat at the edge of the bed with his promise echoing in my chest like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. "It'll stay between us," he said. Back then, those words felt safe, like a shelter against the shame I didn't yet understand. But secrets don't stay buried. They breathe. They find cracks in locked doors. They whisper themselves alive in the dark. And when she found out, when the truth finally clawed its way free, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and myself came undone. This isn't a story about desire. It's about destruction, the kind that starts softly, hidden behind long silences and almost innocent touches, until it's too late to stop. Before we go deeper, I need to be honest. My heart sank when I saw that nearly 90% of you who listen to these stories never subscribe. If you truly value stories that explore the fragile, messy sides of being human, please like and subscribe. That one small click keeps this work alive and helps these voices be heard. If you're still here, if something in this story already feels too close, too real, stay with me. Because what comes next isn't easy. It's the moment the secret stops being a secret and becomes the truth that ruins everything. I used to think silence was peaceful, that when two people could share a room without speaking, it meant they understood each other in some wordless, deeper way. But silence can also be the sound of something dying. It took me years to realize that. The nights in our house had grown heavier, slower, almost sacred in their emptiness. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. The television murmured with its soft blue light long after he had fallen asleep on the couch. And I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything we no longer said pressing down on me. There was a time when his hand would find mine without looking. When laughter came easily, when we couldn't wait to tell each other about the smallest things, a song I'd heard, a thought he'd had. But that time had thinned into memory, something faint and almost embarrassing to recall. Now, he'd come home later than usual, smelling faintly of the city and exhaustion, his eyes fixed somewhere far beyond me. I'd ask about his day. He'd answer with half-smiles, half-truths, and I'd nod as though I didn't notice. We were polite. We were stable. We were invisible. It started with small gestures, the kind that never make a sound but change everything anyway. A missed goodnight kiss. A forgotten text. The distance between us wasn't built in days. It was layered over years, quiet and patient. I would pour wine for one instead of two, pretending he'd already had enough. I'd light candles just to have something to do with my hands. The house had become a museum of routines, clean surfaces, folded towels, a life preserved behind glass. And I was the curator, dusting the relics of a love that had long stopped breathing. Then came the first weekend he invited his son to stay. It wasn't unusual. We'd done it before. He was from his first marriage, older now, 21, studying architecture, quiet but charming in a way that made you want to listen. His name was Evan. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the wedding when he'd stood beside his father and looked at me with a kind of polite distance. The way children do when they're not sure how to fit someone new into their story. When he walked through the door that Friday night, the air seemed to shift, the silence rearranging itself into something I couldn't name. He smiled, not the careful, restrained smile of a guest, but something open, easy, warm. And it startled me. I wasn't used to being looked at that way anymore. He hugged me lightly, the scent of rain still clinging to his jacket. And for a moment, I felt something inside me move, something I didn't want to recognize. He talked more than his father, asked about my work, complimented the food, laughed in all the right places. His presence filled the house with a light I hadn't realized was missing. And that night, when he and his father stayed up watching a movie, I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. I could hear their voices through the walls, rising and falling, and beneath it, the pulse of something dangerous. The days that followed blurred together in soft, careful gestures. He stayed longer than planned, a few extra days than a week. He helped around the house, repaired the garden light that had been broken for months, offered to cook one evening when his father was late again. It felt innocent. It was innocent, at least at first. We'd talk while chopping vegetables, trading stories about books, about music. He'd tell me about the city, about his friends, about the feeling of being both lost and free. And I listened too closely. His words filled a space that had been empty for too long. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the porch, he handed me a glass of lemonade and said, almost without thinking, "You seem lonely." The words hit harder than they should have. I laughed it off, but my throat tightened. No one had noticed in years, or maybe they had and just didn't care. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone older than I remembered, someone whose skin carried too many unsaid things. I thought about the way he'd looked at me, not with pity, but with understanding. That kind of gaze is dangerous. It tells you that your pain is visible, that someone is watching, that maybe you still matter. I tried to convince myself it was just kindness, that he was young and empathetic and meant nothing by it. But empathy, when you're starving for affection, can taste a lot like love. I began to wait for his footsteps in the hallway, to listen for his voice in the kitchen, to feel the house awaken when he entered a room. My husband remained distant, wrapped in his own private silences, and I, foolishly, quietly, began to fill the void with the echo of another presence. It wasn't passion yet. It was attention, the kind of attention that rebuilds you one glance at a time. But deep down, I think I knew that once you start looking forward to the wrong person's smile, the rest of your life begins to tilt. And by the time you realize it, gravity has already chosen its side. That night, as the rain fell softly against the window, I caught my reflection in the glass. Two versions of myself overlapping, one faithful, one starving. And I knew, even then, that something had already shifted, quietly, irreversibly. The next morning, the world looked the same, but something beneath it had changed. The kitchen light still flickered, the coffee still brewed too bitter, and the rain still whispered against the roof, yet every sound seemed sharper, every silence heavier. I told myself I was imagining it, the way his eyes lingered a second too long when I handed him a plate, the way my pulse tripped when his shoulder brushed mine. It wasn't attraction, I insisted. It was loneliness finally finding an echo. But lies often begin as comfort. They just grow teeth later. Evan had a way of listening that made you forget how much you were saying. His face stayed open, curious, kind, as if nothing in the world could shock him. When he asked about my dreams, it wasn't polite small talk. It felt like a dare. I told him things I hadn't even told my husband. About the years I wanted to paint, about the cities I wanted to visit, about the woman I used to imagine I'd be. He didn't interrupt or judge. He just nodded, his expression soft with the sort of warmth you only find in people who haven't yet learned what the world will take from them. He made me feel seen. And that was the beginning of everything. My husband barely noticed the change. He was buried in work, in meetings that bled into weekends, in a fatigue so thick it became a personality. He would leave before breakfast and return long after midnight, smelling of rain and stress and the faint chemical tang of hotel soap. I knew he wasn't unfaithful. He was simply elsewhere, a ghost wearing the shape of the man I married. I used to resent his distance. Now I used it as cover. One evening, after a long day that had left me aching in a way I couldn't name, I found Evan sitting on the back porch, sketching the garden under the fading light. The air was cool, damp with the smell of earth and lilacs. I stood behind him for a moment, watching the movement of his pencil. He looked up and smiled, that same open, unguarded expression that disarmed me every time. "You make this place look beautiful," he said, tilting the page toward me. I wanted to tell him it wasn't the garden that was beautiful. It was the way he saw it. But the words stuck somewhere behind my teeth. We sat there in the half-light, our shoulders almost touching, the quiet between us stretching into something alive. I could hear the soft hum of distant traffic, the rustle of wind through the trees. I don't remember who reached for whom first. Maybe no one did. Maybe it was just gravity, that slow, inevitable pull toward the warmth we think we've lost forever. His hand brushed mine, a small, fleeting contact that should have meant nothing. But it did. It meant everything. It was the moment the world split in two, before and after. I didn't pull away, and he didn't move closer, and still it felt like a confession. The air between us thickened, charged with something fragile and wrong. I whispered his name, not to stop him, but to remind myself that he was real, that I hadn't imagined the connection building between us. He looked at me, really looked, and in his eyes I saw my own hunger reflected back. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like accusation. I replayed the moment again and again, trying to frame it as harmless, as motherly, as nothing. But I knew better. When morning came, the guilt had already begun to grow roots, winding around every thought. I told myself I could still fix it, that if I just stepped back, if I just ignored the spark, it would fade. But the truth is, once you taste attention after years of starvation, it becomes impossible to forget. Over the next few days, we danced around it, careful, cautious, pretending the air wasn't different. But avoidance has a scent. It lingers. It betrays you. We found reasons to be near each other. The garden, the dishes, the quiet hours before dinner. My husband remained a shadow at the edge of every room, present but absent, as if he already knew the distance between us had grown too wide to cross. Then came the evening that sealed our fate. The storm had knocked the power out. The house was draped in candlelight. We sat in the living room, the two of us, listening to rain hammer the windows. I don't remember the words, only the silence between them. I said something about feeling trapped, about the ache of being invisible in your own life. He said something about understanding. I turned to him, and the look in his eyes told me everything that words could not. The distance closed itself, and in that moment, I stopped being who I thought I was. But guilt is clever. It doesn't strike all at once. It seeps, it waits. It lets you believe, for a fleeting breath, that you found something pure, something inevitable, something almost holy in its wrongness. It wasn't love. It was escape. And like all escapes, it demanded a price I wasn't ready to pay. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the house washed and silent. He was gone before my husband woke. The air still smelled of rain and regret. And though no one spoke of it, I knew. The secret had already begun its slow, merciless work. Morning always comes too soon after a lie. The light that slips through the curtains feels colder, thinner, like it's searching for something it already suspects. I woke that day pretending the world was still the same, pretending my hands were steady as I made breakfast, pretending I didn't notice the chair at the table that felt like an accusation. My husband spoke about his meetings, about a client who'd canceled at the last minute, and I nodded in all the right places, my smile a mask I could barely hold. Every word he said seemed to echo in the space between what I'd done and what I couldn't undo. Evan had gone back to the city, but traces of him lingered in the air. A book left on the coffee table, the faint scent of his cologne trapped in the hallway rug. I thought if I scrubbed hard enough, if I filled the house with noise and motion, I could erase him. Instead, every sound reminded me of him. The hum of the refrigerator, the uneven rhythm of the faucet dripping, the hollow creak of the stairs. I found myself walking through rooms as if I were haunting them. The house was both too large and too small. No corner offered enough distance from myself. Days passed like fragments of a dream I wanted to wake from. I caught myself glancing at my phone, waiting for a message that never came, both relieved and disappointed by its silence. When guilt grows roots, it twists around even your relief, turning it into something bitter. I began to imagine he regretted it, that perhaps he saw me now for what I was. A mistake carved out of someone else's loneliness. The thought hurt, but it also offered a kind of sick comfort. If he felt disgust, maybe I could learn to feel it too. At night, My husband slept easily, his breathing slow and even, while I lay beside him rehearsing apologies I would never say aloud. I started avoiding mirrors because they told the truth too plainly. The woman staring back at me wasn't wicked, just hollowed out, her eyes dark with the knowledge of what she'd traded for a moment of tenderness. I tried to pray once, not out of faith but desperation, whispering into the dark like a child bargaining with a god she'd long stopped believing in. The words came out thin, useless, dissolving before they reached the ceiling. Then the small mistakes began. I called Evan's name by accident one morning, catching myself just in time as I folded laundry. My husband didn't notice or pretended not to. Later, while cooking dinner, I burned the rice because I'd been staring at the phone again. Guilt sharpens your senses in the worst way. You start to hear meanings that aren't there. See suspicion in every ordinary glance. When my husband asked if something was wrong, I lied easily. Almost too easily. Just tired, I said. The truth was simpler and far heavier. I was unraveling. One evening, while cleaning his study, I found an envelope addressed in Evan's handwriting. My heart stopped. It was nothing, a thank you note for the weekend, polite and harmless. Yet the sight of his name made my pulse pound with dread. My husband noticed my stillness and reached for the envelope, smiling faintly as he read. "He's a good kid," he said. "I'm proud of him." I managed to nod, though my throat burned. That was the moment I understood the cruelty of secrets. They don't just hide what you've done. They turn every innocent moment into a trap. The following week, my husband suggested we visit Evan in the city, a casual offer that felt like punishment. I agreed because refusing would have meant explaining too much. On the drive there, I stared out the window, counting the miles between fear and exposure. The city skyline rose ahead, shimmering like judgment. When we arrived, Evan greeted us with the same warmth as always, his composure so effortless it terrified me. I couldn't meet his eyes for long. Every smile felt rehearsed, every shared glance a silent plea to keep the lie intact. That night, at dinner, my husband laughed more than he had in months. He told stories from Evan's childhood, and the two of them teased each other with an ease that twisted my stomach. Watching them, I felt like an intruder in my own life. The guilt became almost physical, a weight pressing against my ribs. Evan caught my gaze once across the table, just a flicker, brief but sharp. And I saw it there. The same fear, the same exhaustion. Whatever we'd done had followed him too. Back home, the distance between my husband and me began to feel alive, as if the secret itself were breathing between us. He started asking questions with his eyes rather than his voice, looking at me a beat too long, sensing something unnamed. I told myself he'd never guess the truth. It was too absurd, too cruel to imagine. But suspicion doesn't need evidence, only silence. And I was giving it plenty. Weeks passed. The air grew colder, the days shorter. I kept expecting the secret to fade, to dissolve like fog in sunlight, but instead it hardened into part of me. Some nights I caught myself wishing he would find out, that the explosion would finally come and I could stop pretending. Living inside a lie is like holding your breath indefinitely. Sooner or later, your body starts to tremble from the lack of air. One evening, while clearing the dinner plates, my husband said softly, "You've been far away lately." The plate slipped from my hands, shattering against the floor. The sound was sharp, final. I knelt to gather the pieces, my fingers shaking, and for a moment I saw my reflection in the broken porcelain, distorted, scattered. He crouched beside me, his voice gentle. "Whatever it is," he said, "you can tell me." But I couldn't. The words lodged in my throat, heavy as stones. Because the truth once spoken doesn't free you. It just changes the kind of prison you live in. Secrets don't stay buried. They learn to breathe through the smallest cracks. For weeks I'd felt it shifting beneath the surface, that uneasy tremor that warns you the ground is about to give way. My husband grew quieter, not in the familiar, distant way, but with purpose. His silence no longer meant indifference. It meant suspicion. He started watching me differently, studying my movements as though searching for the outline of something he couldn't yet name. The evenings became unbearable, dinners eaten to the rhythm of unspoken questions, his eyes flicking between me and the untouched glass of wine, waiting for a truth I refused to hand him. The call came on a Sunday afternoon. His voice, steady, brittle, cut through the stillness like a blade. When he came home, the house looked smaller, the walls pressing inward. He walked past me without a word, his face unreadable, the kind of calm that hides a storm beneath it. I followed him into the kitchen, my mouth dry, hands trembling. The smell of detergent, of the afternoon's stale coffee, of the ordinary, felt unbearable against the enormity of what hovered between us. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Tell me it isn't true," he said quietly. The plea in his voice was worse than anger. It was the sound of someone hoping, for the last time, to be wrong. But there was no lie left big enough to hold us. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I could hear the clock ticking, the faint buzz of the refrigerator, the shallow rhythm of his breathing as the truth settled into him like poison. He didn't ask for details. He didn't want the story. He just wanted to understand how I could have crossed a line so unspeakable. I couldn't answer because I didn't know either. It hadn't been lust, not exactly. It had been hunger, for recognition, for warmth, for the illusion of being alive again. But how could I explain that without sounding monstrous? How do you defend a sin that was born from emptiness? He left that night without taking anything. No suitcase, no explanation. Just the sound of the front door closing with finality. I stood there, waiting for his footsteps to return, for the key to turn again. But the house stayed silent. Every object around me seemed to recoil. The pictures on the wall, the clock, the ring on my finger. I walked through each room, touching the surfaces as if I could apologize to them. The air itself had changed. It carried his absence like a wound. Days passed without word. The phone stayed still. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment, every careless glance, every choice that had led here. Guilt was no longer abstract. It had a taste, metallic and sharp, sitting on the back of my tongue. I started hearing whispers that weren't there, echoes of his voice in the dark, Evan's laughter tangled with the rain outside. The mind has strange ways of punishing itself. It traps you in the moments you most want to forget. When he finally returned, it wasn't forgiveness he brought with him. It was reality. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate, as if he were building a wall between us with them. "She knows," he said. I told her. My breath caught. The last barrier, the last fragile illusion of control, shattered. His ex-wife, Evan's mother, knew, which meant Evan knew I was no longer a secret. The circle of silence we had built around ourselves had collapsed, and the ruin spread outward. The following days were a blur of cold light and restless pacing. Calls unanswered. Doors unopened. The neighbors noticed the tension, the sudden quiet. Rumors have a scent, and ours spread quickly. I stopped going out. Every reflection, every window, felt like an accusation. My husband and I shared the same space but lived in separate worlds, bound together only by the echo of what we'd destroyed. His anger had cooled into something worse, indifference. That frightened me more than rage ever could. There was one final conversation. It wasn't planned. It simply happened, like the truth had waited until it could no longer hold itself back. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, tired. "You broke something in me," he said. His voice didn't shake. Not just trust. Something deeper. The part that believed in us. He didn't wait for my reply. There was nothing left to say. After he left, the house felt weightless, hollow, as though all the air had been drained out. The photographs on the mantel seemed to watch me, silent witnesses to a life I'd undone. I walked through the rooms one last time, touching the doorknobs, the fabric of the curtains, the chipped paint on the windowsill. Everything ordinary had become unbearable in its innocence. That night, I sat in the dark and listened to the house breathe. The faint creak of settling wood, the distant hum of passing cars. It sounded almost human, almost forgiving. But forgiveness wasn't coming. Not from him, not from Evan, not from myself. The truth was out, and it had stripped me clean. I thought secrets destroyed people because they stayed hidden. I was wrong. They destroy you because once revealed, they show you exactly who you are, and there's no turning away. Morning came quietly, without apology. The sky was pale, almost colorless, a thin wash of light over the wreckage of what used to be a life. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel angry. It just felt empty. I walked through it barefoot, the floor cold against my skin, every step stirring a memory that had already lost its warmth. The photographs were gone now, packed away somewhere out of sight. The ring sat on the kitchen counter, a small circle of metal that no longer fit. I had imagined that when everything ended, there would be noise, shouting, tears, breaking things. Instead, there was only quiet acceptance, the kind that comes after every excuse has burned itself out. I spent those first days moving through routines stripped of meaning, washing dishes, folding sheets, watering plants that didn't need it. Each act felt like penance, a way to keep my hands from trembling. People still called occasionally, voices wrapped in polite curiosity, asking if I was all right, if we were taking space. I answered in half-truths. You learn to speak around the shame until it sounds